All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Shelburne Planning Commission for Thursday, December 13th. First item of the agenda is approval of the agenda. A motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All right. Moved by Andrew, seconded by Dick. Any discussion? No. All right. Not seeing any discussion. All in favor of the agenda as posted, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. Hey, Steven, how you doing? Okay, so now on to the minutes from last week. Approval. Get a motion to approve these minutes.
So moved.
Moved by Dick,
Second.
seconded by Andrew. All right, any discussion?
See much of anything.
Yeah, any of my notes had to do just with my own clarity, but the minutes look good. Any other?
I had no concerns.
Cool, all right. Well, hearing none then, all in favor of approving the minutes as written, say aye.
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 Abstained over here.
And
It wasn't there.
Stephen abstained, all right. Okay, so any disclosures to anything relating to tonight's topics?
I have something that I don't think is related, I don't believe it's a conflict, but I have an accessory structure. And I am going to have it, I'm going to change it to residential structure, but it's a subdivision. It's not a accessory use. And I will be well underway and in the process before anything we do will ever come to fruition. So I just wanted to
I don't know that this is a big one either, but I know we're going to be talking about electric vehicles and charging stations. I'm the proud owner of 2 electric vehicles, so I'm biased in their favor. I'm all for charging stations.
Well, I don't have any electric vehicles and I am biased as well, but
Yeah.
I don't think that.
Just want to throw that out
problems
there.
with them either. So
Right.
I own a car. It happens to be electric too, but I think we all own cars. We're all biased. Yep.
Yeah. All right, so I think we're good. And unless Dean, unless you heard anything.
I don't have
from
any
Dick's, I didn't think-
advice to offer you other than to say that you're in a policy-making mode right now. So you don't, the standard that you have to worry about isn't the same standard you'd have to worry about if you were looking at an application as a member of the DRB. So
Yeah, I think there's that, and to your point.
I think it's
too,
good
we'd
for the
already be
public to
settled
know
by
that
the
you're
time this gets
drivers
through.
of electric cars.
Right, that too.
And I think it's good for the public to know that Dick is going to be doing a subdivision that may someday result in that accessory structure, which would become a primary structure, being changed in use. But right now, it's really just a subdivision.
Right.
Right. Okay, so next is open to the public, and if whomever reached out happens to show up, we could, if everybody's okay with it, we could pause for a few minutes and get their input if that's okay. And if they don't show up, then we'll just keep cruising.
Wow, you went from 5 minutes behind to like 15 minutes ahead of schedule.
That's how we roll.
Amazing.
All right, so on to the zoning matters. The two this evening are what we've been talking about. The first one is the Lake Champlain transportation. The second one is around accessory apartments. And I would thank Dean for how you included the bylaw change reports in the event that we only pass one, or if we do both. Or by pass, I mean move forward.
Yeah, this is really just a decision having to do with warning a public hearing. That you need to have the reports available. They don't really go anywhere at this point, but after the hearing, they would. So that may take some of the pressure off in terms of what people are making of it.
Yeah, well, and as far as the first one regarding setbacks with over at the shipyard is we've had the discussion. The change report is here. I would just ask: are there any questions, concerns, or anything that we hadn't talked about previously that would necessitate any discussion around this specifically?
One issue that, it's not really as much an issue as, I was trying to think how we can make this a little different than representing everything. And is there a way we could do it so that maybe a business that has been in place since zoning was enacted or something, so that this will be limited only to long-term businesses such as Lake Champlain, which has been there for over 100 years probably. So I didn't know if there was some way we could do that to make it so it wouldn't really, there aren't really any other properties that would be affected by this, other than the shipyard.
There may be a way, but the thing I would say is that it would require the planning commission to do something kind of significant, which is to create different classes of non-complying structures. I mean, the statute basically says that municipalities have some authority and they have some discretion about how they treat nonconformities, but a pre-existing nonconformity has a pretty specific meaning. It's something that was okay up to the point of some change in regulation. I'm not aware of a time when the Planning Commission has considered a zoning change that would give some more flexibility for a nonconformity based on, how long they've been in town or how long a building has existed. I mean, it would be a pretty, depending on what number you chose, how would you justify it? What would be the basis?
I'm leaving that to you, you're the expert. I'm just thinking of the
Well, I wouldn't recommend-
uniqueness of the property. Okay,
There you go.
so it was an idea
If you
that
really needed to do
I'm
it.
floating.
Well, the question is, what are the implications? What other properties could this affect?
That's a different question, and if you weren't as, at the point where you were last time, where you seemed to be fairly okay, and we were still talking about it, we could, I would have come to this meeting with, some map or something that would have addressed, and you'd raised that, but you were at the point of saying, let's tee this up to warn for public hearing. We could certainly have that, if you are saying now, something like, you want to warn a hearing, but before you acted on it at a hearing, you'd want to see a map that estimated how many properties would potentially be involved, and yes, we would definitely do that. Or you could delay warning it for public hearing because you want to know how many
Could
before
we-
you do that.
Could we have the map come to the public hearing?
Well, that's what I'm saying, is that if you say that you want
That way we
it
can-
to be done that way,
Cover both stones and not have to delay it?
Yeah, I mean, if we need to go down that path, from the discussion that we had last time, I was thinking that's why I was looking for the extreme examples of worst case, you'd have an existing structure that could extend its footprint by 25%. And is that enough to say that we want to go through and do this catalog and find out all of the properties that could be affected
And go right up to its property line, right?
Right. Well, it's the same, I mean, it's all the language that Quinny used and that is
Well, it
happening
is-
at the shipyard, so
It is
yeah.
at his property line already, so,
But they're not going over it.
Right,
right, so
Right.
they're not going closer.
right. So it'd have to be the same scenario.
So it would be an existing footprint that gets extended, but doesn't get extended any closer to the boundary. So it would just be
Right.
the lengthening potentially of up to 25% along a boundary.
So if someone's sitting on a property line, they want to expand, they could do that sideways or backwards,
By 25%.
but they're
of the
already
original
sitting on the
footprint.
property line,
Up
so
to 25%.
that's the offense, right? Okay.
So
that's
the
more
only
help-
ones
that's
we would
helpful.
worry about are old, large structures for the 25%.
well, yeah, I mean, this is,
So there might
yeah,
be-
you're not
might be
likely to see any buildings more recent than, I'd say, unless there was a variance given, the last 30 or 40 years.
Right.
That would be in this situation.
Yeah, and I'm not against exploring what you're asking, but when I heard potentially adding a date, putting a date in there.
That was just a,
Yeah, but there would need to be some kind of a trigger, and on the housing thing that we'll get to, I was just noticing that we've got a lot of dates that are kind of all over the place depending on the section it's in because of how that bylaw changed at the time. And for me anyway, like reading through bylaws, I would really like to get to a point of streamlining where possible so we don't have all of these different caveats that get difficult to explain. Well, so why is it that the rural district it's any structure as of this date, but in the residential district it's any building as of this date? Like it
Because
starts.
that's when the change was made.
That's when the change is made, and I get that, but you reach a point where then people start forgetting why and what the reasons were, and it just starts to be more complicated than not.
Yeah, Susanna, if there was an expectation to have that information, I apologize for flubbing it.
No, it's fine. No, this clarified. I don't think I need to see a map.
Because what I had sensed is that kind of concern was raised, but then after talking through it, the recognition was, yeah, it's not going to be very many places, and it's not going to be any closer, and it's not going to be more than 25%. So it's pretty narrow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So is there, I don't know what that exercise would entail. Like if it's going to be like a massive thing, then I would err on the side of,
I think it would only be commercial buildings, mostly on Route 7, that would.
This is a rural district, remember. Route 7, the Planning
perhaps.
Commission has already given the ability to someone who owns a building in the mixed-use district to extend along the property line without any restriction on the amount.
Having said that, it would only be a barn, so I have no interest.
okay.
Further concern.
All right. Hey, Kate. So we were just talking about the Lake Champlain Transportation setback amendment or adjustment. And it didn't seem so far like there are any showstoppers to moving forward with that.
Great.
If you had any
Nope.
thoughts or. Okay. So if that looks good to move forward, then we can set that aside for now and move on to accessory apartments. And if we find a way to move forward with that, then we can do both of them together. And as far as that topic goes, the table of permitted and conditional uses that was included, we've been through this before, and the main change is just showing that accessory apartments will no longer be conditional uses and they're going to become permitted uses, right? With the 1 and 2 bedroom.
Yeah, I'm going to be sticking about on pretty much most of this.
Okay,
Thanks for wanting a stick.
stick away.
I think that treating each of these districts equally is possibly a mistake. I think that chart that I produced, for one thing, the size increases. None of the 5 towns that I did has over 30%. Shelburne's already at 35%. And having an unlimited number, some towns cap. Other towns use a minimum for small structures. If you had for instance, a 1,000 square foot house, you'd only have a 300-foot accessory. So some towns, I'm thinking of Colchester, has a 900-foot minimum,
Maximum?
or
of
30%.
Do you mean maximum?
No, well, no, they allow them to, say they only qualify at 30% for 300 on 1,000. They're allowed to start with 900, or 30%, whichever is larger.
Could I think out loud for a second?
So they're guaranteeing everyone gets a minimum of 900. That's what this Colchester does. They guarantee that you, no matter how small your house is, you can erect a 900-foot accessory, at least. Or they allow 30%, like everyone else does.
So if the dwelling is, for argument's sake, already 900 square feet, then you just basically double it on the lot if there's
You
room?
still have a minimum, right? And all of these are, I believe, not all of them, but most of them are attached. Most towns have them attached. Some towns allow them to, depending on the size of a lot, they'll allow individual accessory structure to be erected. I think Williston's one of those, they have a 1,500-foot max on everything. I like that. The only one that I think I like the formula. Some of the formulas, like the one that Heinsberg has, it's under 1,600, it's 75%, 1,600 to 4,000, it's, for some reason, 1,200 feet. And then over 4,000, they allow 30% expansion. I would like to see us take structures over 4,000 feet and allow them to do anything internally that they want to in creating an apartment within. So if you take an 8,000-foot house up on the hill, you can put in a 2,000 or 3,000 square foot two-bedroom if you want to, without basically have it permitted, as long as, you know, it goes through just to show what's being done.
Say that again.
If you have a house over 4,000 feet,
Yeah.
and this is something that one of the other towns, Essex had something in their notes about, had to be internal. But if, my thought was if you had a 4,000 square foot house or larger, that you could do an internal subdivision with two bedrooms for as large as you want inside that house. So if you have a 6,000 square foot house and you want a 2,000 foot apartment within an accessory, we don't care. Up to 50% of the house.
Are you talking like a conduization? Or when you
No,
say
it's an accessory,
subdivision
still be an
internal?
accessory, and maybe it should have a limit, but maybe it shouldn't be as limiting as, I know there are houses in town that are 7, 8, 10,000 feet, and if they want to put
Right.
an apartment
But-
internally as opposed to,
With those houses that are that, you know, you start talking about a 7,000 square foot house, chances are it's on a pretty good sized lot. Chances are decent, at least, that it's on a lot that's large enough that would qualify for a duplex. I mean, and also there's also the allowance for the caretaker. So I mean, for the very large house, there are some other options that are apart from accessory apartments.
yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's just a thought.
Well, if we're talking extremes, then I think at that point, the market for this would probably be slim. But if you're talking about a 7,000 square foot house with our current rules, you could put on a two-bedroom, 3,500 foot accessory apartment, which, I mean, I suppose somebody could do that. I failed to see.
I suppose, yeah, it is a little out there.
I do agree with the lower bound makes sense when you hear that if you have a 1,000 square foot residence, that limits you to what the size of that accessory apartment could be. That to me seems like a good consideration.
I think we need you in the front row, Pam.
And I'll get another copy of that.
I actually printed it out,
Well, this is something Dick handed out.
something new, okay.
Since I missed the last meeting, is the proposal to have up to 50%? That's what this is, up to 50% with
Right.
no maximum?
Yeah.
As long as it stays within
We would be the
two
only-
bedrooms?
We would be the only town in Chittenden County that does that.
And
Now,
to
there-
get to that point, one of the thoughts I was kicking around in my own mind is that, okay, if the idea is you're concerned about the maximum size of an accessory apartment, then would you want to consider in the definition of accessory apartment saying what the maximum size in square footage is?
I would want to. I'd be a similar stick as far as that goes, to say that we would have to, because there are some pretty big houses out there, and some of them are even two-bedroom houses, and just, worked the closet numbers in order to be called two-bedroom houses. We recently did a replacement of one house in town that was about 6,000 square feet, and it was two bedrooms.
So down on the point?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know the one, yeah.
So there are different ways you could crack that nut. You could have the numbers in each district, or if you felt like there was one number that worked across all accessory apartments, then maybe you could do something in the definition we hadn't we hadn't talked about that, but.
I mean, for that matter, you could keep it at 50%, but have a min and a max. And then,
Yeah.
I think, well, and mostly for argument's sake, I'm just trying to, when I was looking through this and seeing the changes that need to happen, these changes are being applied to each different district. And when you start seeing some of the differences between districts, that it's the process of just changing on the fly and starting to lose consistency and seeing what,
Oh, you're not going to be happy then, because I've got even more.
cool.
For one thing, the conditional uses that are all struck, most towns have conditional use for two bedrooms.
We're not most towns, Dick.
We don't in Westford,
No.
no. And we don't require conditional use. You can add on
You
to your,
have two bedrooms too?
yeah, you can go up to 2 bedrooms.
I didn't go
Yeah.
out to the sticks too far. I just tried to stay in the local towns, kind of like Shelburne.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
My issues against doing a uniform thing are, we have some high-traffic roads in Shelburne, and I'm thinking of 4 in particular. Falls Road, from basically the village to the bridge, is very high traffic. It's difficult to get out of your driveway now. Most of the Falls area is quarter-acre zone, and most of the Falls area has room for subdivisions on almost each lot there. So I don't know that permitting a 2-bedroom accessory is a good idea and increasing traffic on those roads. I'm thinking also Philo Road to the airport from Falls Road. Marset Road was very high traffic. So all you're doing is increasing turning movements and traffic. They're already allowed an accessory on the Shelburne regs. And the other area I was thinking of was from the bridge in Route 7 to Bostwick Road. I don't think it's a great idea to encourage additional traffic in several different points. That's, you know, if somebody was putting a large structure in with a central way to get out, that makes sense for housing.
But isn't the irony that most of those areas you just described are pretty close to the central core of town, which is where you'd want the density for walkability, transit access?
Most of if you're talking about the houses in the core areas of those developments, they would be using those streets to come out. So they would be coming out of one place. They wouldn't be coming out of multiple areas. And Falls Road, I live there. I just had a bypass go through my house for 6 weeks.
Really, yeah.
And you would not believe how many cars come out of there. My brother's always complaining, he lives on Falls Road, about getting out, even going to work in the morning sometimes. And I would sit there the last few weeks and wait for 15 or 20 cars to go by just to get out of my driveway.
But Dick, the traffic problem on Falls Road is not caused by the people that live on Falls Road.
Right.
It's
But
the
it's going to-
thousands of cars that are going through. You could say that allowing
No lack
a
of connectivity.
4,000 square foot accessory apartment, you know, on Thomas Road or, you know, something like that, they're going to drive on Falls Road. In the rural district, they're going through Falls Road, and they're up to speed by the time they get to Falls Road. It's not like, I mean, the bad traffic is the fast traffic, and just the commuter traffic, the people that don't care what goes on, you know, in the neighborhood they're passing through because they just want to get to work or get to where
I
they're
just
going.
reflect back when I was on the DRB, and one of the things we did was traffic counts and how it's going to affect neighborhoods. And you add 2 cars coming out of every 4th driveway, first of all, they're going to back out. You got kids walking up and down the sidewalk. So you've got multiple accesses, and you're creating more traffic for them, on top of the individual safety of, the cars themselves.
I certainly hear the concern, and I'd like to talk it out. You had said something earlier on the Falls Road side where it's quarter-acre zoning.
Yes.
So,
Most of those lots are already subdividable. One has just been subdivided, very poorly, I might add. We should look at that as well.
So is the concern, thinking worst case, that if all of those went into quarter acre lots and then all of
And then you
those
add
got accessory
accessories
apartments?
into that neighborhood. And the same thing with Philo Road, the early part of Philo Road, Marset Road, the entire, well, Marset Road's probably not as much, I don't know what the lots are there, and I'm not sure what the zone is. Are those half acre or quarter?
Well, that village, it's 15,000, I think.
So those are quarter acre lots, and they're mostly close to half acre lots.
Well, I don't agree that putting more density in the center of town is a bad thing.
I don't mind it being in the center
From-
of town, it's just that the high traffic roads, those roads are already impacting the residents.
But what part is in the center of town that's not on a high-traffic road? There's only like 3 roads that come through the center of town.
Well, I guess my
Falls, Harbor,
second,
Route 7, and
My-
those are the high-traffic roads.
my primary question is, why do we want to do this in the first place? We already have an allowance for an accessory apartment in every single house in town.
That's a
Maybe that's a
conditional use.
housing committee question.
I think the reason that we.
Would you mind grabbing the mic? Sorry to interrupt. Marion's doing the notes.
I think you are. We don't have the house sound on because we don't feel like we need it, but it's mainly for Ken.
Okay.
And the audience at home.
Everyone who's watching at home. Okay, so the housing subcommittee decided or started talking about this accessory apartment idea, not to create something new, but to make it a little bit easier for people to add the housing for potentially for elderly, you know, for their parents or for their children to be able to stay in town. I don't think it's not like we're trying to recreate or create something entirely new. You're right, it already exists. We're just trying to make it a little easier to accomplish, not so many hurdles to jump through or jump over to be able to add accessory apartment.
It's in the draft comprehensive plan.
It is in the draft comprehensive plan. Thank you for that reminder. Yeah, it's one of the goals in the, or one of the,
Well, making it easier as opposed to making it larger is two different things. I mean, I can see making a one-bedroom accessory larger, but I would think that it would still be a good idea to be selective about where the 2 bedrooms can go, lot sizes. I have other concerns besides traffic. I have, you know, the character of the neighborhoods themselves, and I talked about that earlier. And that entails if, you know, somebody lives in the Falls, and they enjoy their backyard, they bought their yard because of it's a yard that's private, and then you have 2 accessory apartments on either side, they've lost that. They move, and you're really changing
Well,
the dynamics.
Yeah, that's,
I mean,
I don't
that can
see
happen
how that could be
anyway.
an
It
argument.
can, but it doesn't have to be as large as
So, but-
as what we're asking for. And the other, I have another question. I'm wondering how many accessory apartments are requested. Do we have an idea?
What's the current inventory of approved accessory
I mean,
apartments in
no,
the
like in the
town?
last year or two.
Oh, that have been approved? It's not very many. We don't see it, and I think that's part of the motivation that the housing committee has had, is to create an incentive for it.
Since we expanded our accessory dwelling unit regulations in Westford, we have seen a huge increase in requests for them, become very popular.
That was one of the things we were hoping to do if this was to pass. We were going to actually do some outreach. You know, Burlington did something recently where they did like a workshop on how to apply for an accessory apartment permit and how to go about, you know, the whole process. And
That's the other thing, is I'm in the business, but I'm not a growth advocate for the sake of growth. I think that a lot of people are really happy in Shelburne with what they have.
Well,
And I'm seeing that the push for this is not people who live here.
Well, it's affordable housing.
And it's not, it's a limited form of affordable housing, but who are we to tell neighborhoods that they have to change?
nobody has to do anything.
No, but you can't stop if we make this move.
These uses are allowed as conditional uses in the
Right,
regs
so they
right
could
now.
happen anyway. It's
Right, they
just-
are conditional
To me,
uses.
this
That's
is
what I'm
streamlining
saying.
the process.
I don't know about it. And the other thing I'm concerned about, is both, well, things that I've been exposed to, stormwater. We have to contend with that. That's basically the last of it. Anyway, I've said my piece. I just think that what we have is pretty close to what we should be, where we should be. I think we were responsible when we did that.
But then, all right.
And I think lot sizes, again, should be one of the dynamics. If you have a very tiny lot in the village, and do we want to impact the village with larger accessory structures and change the character of the village itself? That's the last of my speech.
Before the meeting started, I asked Dina about I didn't know what the rules are about VRBO or Airbnb, and they're not allowed.
Well, our
Basically.
position in the planning and zoning office would be is that it's not an authorized use, but like I also said, it's hard to enforce.
My only concern is that people might be eager to sign up to create an accessory because it's very rentable. And that's not a scenario we really want. So I think if this all happens and there's outreach, I think it would need to be explicit what an accessory apartment's intended for and what it's not intended for. Because that's what you really don't want.
That and owner occupancy is already required.
Well, right, I mean, it's fine. Owners occupy the home and then they rent out to people coming in for weddings and graduations and.
I can definitely see that as something that we want to explore a bit, because you could,
Well-
I mean, there's nothing preventing anybody from renting out their place today through any of those things, right?
I would say that
Yeah,
the
there
Airbnb
is.
thing is a symptom of a problem, that there's a lack of housing.
No.
Lack of hotels.
No, that's
Airbnb
Lack of
is-
hotels and lack of
Well, it's a-
affordable housing, too.
But people don't rent Airbnbs because they can't find an apartment, I don't think. Or if they do, that would be rare, or a transitioning thing. It's not, that's not more affordable than housing in a
No,
lot
but
of
the
cases.
incentive for the property owner to rent out for Airbnb instead of renting out as a rental unit,
Well, it's
because they
just
can get,
lucrative.
because it's more lucrative, but that's a symptom of the lack of supply. I'm not sure how well I'm stating that, but I think there's a relationship. You know, we have in Shelburne a tremendous amount of single-family housing. We have an unbelievable amount of single-family housing, and the market is changing. A lot of people can't afford that anymore. A lot of people don't want it. They want to be in a more walkable, compact center. And I think that this is, and the family size is changing too. Family makeup, family size is changing. We have people who want to age in place. You
Did
know,
you see that Minneapolis just got rid of single-family
Yeah.
zoning in the whole city?
I meant to send the link.
Yeah.
We're not a city.
Everything's
We're a suburban,
But it's just a-
semi-rural area.
Right, but it's,
We're the town that everybody else looks at as the town to where people want to be. And we're in a
Correct.
huge emphasis.
So we should make it
So,
accessible to.
Exactly.
Well, by making it accessible, we'll change that character.
Sure,
And
but-
yeah, there'll be a lot of people here, but it won't be the people that are here
So
now.
we
That's
we
my
were all
fear.
part of the town plan process that is now up for approval at the select board, and there are some themes in there that get into increasing density in
I
the
had-
growth areas.
I had to argue about that section that says that, about the growth area. It was put in 2007 in the town plan by the planners. And then as soon as it was accepted, the planners went and made those changes. And that should not be in there any longer. The changes to zoning were done. That's what they were looking for, was the opportunity to make those changes. And that, so now it's sitting there, and every time somebody comes in and reads the town plan and says, oh, we're supposed to put more housing in this area, how long will we do that?
Well, if we do it in
I
the
don't know
right
how to
places,
respond to that,
then-
given the
then it's a good
conversations we've
thing.
had.
But it should.
I think that the thing that makes this town good, it's not that the housing stock is wonderful, because it's not. And it's not in general, in great shape, and it's not in general dense enough, in my opinion. I think that the kind of things that we want to support in the town are getting, people to go to the businesses. We've got, businesses, storefronts that are empty, in several places where there should be things happening. We have restaurants that come in for a year or two and then go out because there's not enough people doing the things. We have a transit system that's wonderful and that, very few people ride it because it can't get out to the rural areas, as, it doesn't make sense to. And I think this is by expanding, by making it easy to do an accessory structure and also making it a two-bedroom structure so that families can go in and new families or old families or whatever, but it's not limited to just, single-person households.
I'm not
then-
opposed to,
Then we're encouraging the growth of the village as well. I mean, if we were going to do this in one place, I'd say let's do it in the village and not in the other districts. But I think it makes a lot of sense in the other districts as well. But it definitely should be in the village.
I'm not sure about the two-bedroom in the village if the lot was, I think it depends on the lot size and will it impact the neighbor? How close is it going to be to the neighbor?
So
Because
maybe
you're-
to add some frontage minimum.
Or some language
side-
to that
side.
effect, and that it doesn't have to be.
There are already setbacks, right? For
Yeah,
properties?
And almost, as long as they're required, and lot coverages as well.
Yeah, that wouldn't change. We
Right.
wouldn't eliminate those regulations, right? I wouldn't see any
I
sense.
mean, just because in any of these districts, if an accessory apartment becomes a permitted use versus a conditional use, that doesn't mean that they could just plop it anywhere on the property. There's still other factors that,
Well, I'd like to see them be attached, if they're indeed accessory, for the most part, unless a
the only thing
property is large
the
enough.
language already says, in an existing owner occupied single-family dwelling or an existing accessory structure. Right? So, I mean, we're not talking
So
about.
we're not looking about putting independent structures, new structures.
That's
the
not
only
how I
thing
read
was what
this
you
anyway.
threw out last week, which was, someone builds a secondary structure as their own use and then later converts it to. But that's the only, it would be a
Yeah,
multi-step
that's,
process.
I forget what that was.
And that just takes a lot of planning and commitment to pull
Right,
that
that's
off
good.
like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was.
I scanned the system.
It's
That
like,
was
I'm not
Wilson.
even mad, I'm impressed.
So I guess what I want to know though, Dick, is is your concern with the two bedroom? Is your concern with 50%? Is it the?
My concern is in the traffic areas. So
But,
I'm not
but
opposed to
what would you
accessory
change
housing.
about the language we've come up with?
I would not put two bedrooms in high traffic areas in the small rural roads right now that are thoroughfares, like
So you'd have
Falls Road.
selective areas that allowed two bedroom 50% and certain
Or
areas
if
would
the
only
lot
have one
size is,
bedroom and
if the
some
lot size
smaller
is more
percentage.
than,
I'm just trying to clarify, like, so in some areas you would say one bedroom and some smaller percentage than 50%.
I would say yes, I think it should be limited. I don't care if it's 50% either, if it's got a cap on it. If it says 1,500, then I'm happy with it. Because,
Just do keep in mind already, though, that two-bedroom up to 50% can be proposed as a conditional use in those locations. So I guess what I'm trying to understand, Dick, is are you saying that's too generous?
the two-bedroom,
Two-bedroom, up to 50% as a conditional use?
is that a
'Cause that's
conditional use?
already, that's already in
conditional use.
place.
I wasn't even aware of that.
Well,
But
look at the
that's what's
language.
being stricken out, right? Is
Yeah.
the conditional use part, and we're making it a permitted use. So
Right.
in the case of residential district, you add 14.3 and take away 420.3. Because we're basically just making it permitted what already is conditional, and adding the 50% and
Well, I would
existing
prefer to
dwelling.
I would rather keep the 30% and go with a formula of a minimum, guaranteed minimum, and a maximum.
I think
rather
that
than
a
creating-
A maximum minimum is good. A guaranteed minimum and a maximum, I like that. I think that's good.
So where would the maximum be? And I'm thinking 15, only because Williston has done that.
Oh.
And,
But we're Shelburne and everybody wants to come here, so we should be able to drive,
but a
right?
1,500 square foot, I live in a 1,400 square foot, 3-bedroom, 2-bath house with a walkout basement.
Right?
So it seems like to me, that an accessory of 1,500 feet seems quite adequate.
I think it's too big. 1,500, that's big.
Well, I think, yeah, I'm,
For an accessory, that's another house.
right.
I mean, I think maybe 900 is too small, but, I mean, you can do a lot in a 900 square foot house, but
900 's
1,500
usually-
just seems a little,
900 is usually a 1-bedroom, I think.
But
Or
that's, I
guaranteed.
mean, yeah, but that's up to whoever designs the place. I mean, you can,
The other thing is if we're talking about affordable housing, why do we want to create 3,000-foot apartments?
there is an argument there. I don't know that we would be creating 3,000-foot apartments, but that, I mean, sure, I suppose anything's possible if you had a 6,000 square foot house and they wanted to do that with 2 bedrooms. And that is a very good point that Stephen brought up as well, where you could have a 6,000 square foot 2-bedroom house, but they have more than 2 bedrooms. They're just closets that are, and it's wordplay. That to me is not a reason to work around rules. That's a way of just figuring out a way to enforce that and make the definition better.
well, I'm crossing myself back. Maybe 1,500 square feet is probably a good maximum. 900 would be a guaranteed minimum.
The
For people
existing
with small-
structure would have to be 900? So 1,500 is the accessory, 900 would be the
No, no,
smallest
no.
possible house. that
900
they
saying-
would be a guarantee that they can
No,
get at
They're
least
talking
900.
about max and min of the accessory
Of the
apartment.
accessory?
Or
Okay.
So
is
the
there
accessory
about
apartment
right?
could,
Well, just because we talked about other
But if you
places have
have a-
like a
oh, no, it's a-
900
it's
or
a
1,000 foot
guaranteed
minimum.
If somebody
Guaranteed
wanted a
minimum.
smaller minimum, they
So
could
if
do
somebody
that.
starts off with a 1,000 square foot house on their property as their main house,
Yeah,
30% of that's tiny.
Right.
So
oh, I see,
they'd be allowed a normal size
Got it.
accessory
okay.
apartment.
or in our case, 50%.
I mean,
but
that
still.
actually sounds pretty good.
So if they had a 1,000 square foot house, you'd get a 500 foot accessory.
Based on the language that's in here now, but
Yeah.
what's being talked about is to say that the minimum would be 900 square feet.
Even if you started with 1,000 or
Yeah,
900.
and that's what initially, when that was first said, I thought, okay, so you take a 900 square foot house, and by definition, if we make it a 900 foot minimum, you're doubling the size of that
Yeah.
property,
Little
Right.
or
house.
the residence, right?
And then you, two
What do you
lots.
think of Heinsberg's rules here, where
Right.
you've got these, 75% of up to 1,600 feet, max of 1,200, and then 30% of anything over 4,000?
Well, you're still looking at a,
1,200
okay.
square foot house at 4,000.
yeah, either way, it's a 1,200 square foot house.
Right.
So they're kind of
They're starting at 1,200 with a 4,000 square foot, but they are at 30%, which is why I like the 30%.
And if you had a 9,000 square foot house, you could have a 3,000 square foot accessory, is that,
Not if we put a cap on.
okay.
I think having a cap is a good idea. I don't think we want huge accessory apartments. It's
Yeah.
not the intent
Yeah.
of what the housing committee is.
So
That
is it-
wasn't the impetus for this proposal.
And
so-
that's what I was looking to come back to, because the impetus was to increase density, and I heard your comment, where do we stop? But based on the last couple of years talking about the plan, we are moving forward with wanting to increase density. That's been a theme. So I don't think that we can, in good faith, walk that back right now.
Well, I intend to do something when the select board comes through. I want to, I made the argument here, and as a citizen, I intend to argue that point. I don't know that they'll change it. I don't think they will. But I just want to plant the seed.
I would have preferred that seed got planted a year ago, but that's a different
Well, I tried.
thing.
I tried.
Okay.
And in fact, we tried in the last time we did the town plan, and it's still stuck.
So looking at Heinsberg's, basically, any way you cut it, they're saying your maximum is about 1,200 square feet, give or take 100.
Right.
Unless you have
So-
a really large home.
Well, if you have a really large home, then you're at,
So are we saying 1,500 feet or 30%?
oh, f- I'd say, I like the 1,200 for most houses. I think you can do a two-bedroom house for 1,200 square feet. It's not meant to be a luxury, it could be luxury, but it's not meant to be a grand and whatever type house. So, I mean, I'd be good with between 900 as a guaranteed minimum and a maximum of 30% or 1,200 square feet, whichever is less. But one thing that I just noticed that I really have a reaction to, that when you're bringing up the idea that all this can only happen in a pre-existing building,
Well,
that's taking out the wording that allows for a conditional use accessory apartment that is located in structures that are not pre-existing. So as it's written, or right now, you can build an accessory apartment. But what is proposed is to take that out and say any accessory apartment has to be in a pre-existing building
Or attached.
or attached.
Well, I think that's the intent, isn't it, Dean?
Well, it doesn't say that, but I mean,
That part's gone anyway.
I would rather not have it attached because I think things look better detached rather than the one big glom onto the, something that might be fine as itself, but
I'd
I
second
would
that
say-
just because I think there's a lot of potential scenarios in the village or closer to town where you could have a smaller structure behind, that I know when I talked to the housing group before, they were interested in that and making sure that it was, smaller than the larger structure in the front. And so it wasn't, dwarfing and things like that. But I definitely got the sense the intent was not to stop detached accessory buildings.
So what about considering that as keeping a future, what is it, a not pre-existing as a conditional use, to keep that in there so that option might be there, but to make a permitted use in an existing owner-occupied or an existing structure? Because part of making this a permitted use was also to reduce the administration aspect of it. And I think that's certainly a noble pursuit. I do agree that there could be cases where it would make sense to create an extra structure on a property, but you couldn't, I agree with saying, let's not make that a blanket thing, which is what we did, effectively taking that away in this.
yeah.
Well, just to clarify, the existing is not as of a certain date. So it would be possible if someone gets a permit for an accessory structure, then they come in and they get the application for the accessory apartment. So it's creating an incentive for people to look at their existing home for this first, to either carve it into accessory and primary, or if there was going to be an addition put on to the single-family home. So it's kind of getting at what Dick's idea is, that can it be attached? And that's what the pressure, the way it was written, creates an incentive for someone to do. But it doesn't prevent them, because as Stephen, I think, said, someone could come in and get a permit for a garage, and then they could come in later, because it's an existing structure, then they could get a permit for it, for the apartment.
Which is a reason to put a date in.
Or not have that as something that we want to have anyway. Just to have it so that we can allow people to be like above board up front and say, I'm going to build an accessory apartment right now. Can I do it? And have an answer, yes, no, if it's a conditional
Yeah.
use.
I think we
Or-
have to start
But
thinking about.
it's very easy.
Or
to
not to
fix.
go in and say, I'm going to build a garage and then rip out half the stuff like garage doors, just to do it in a two-step process later on. They may not want a garage. They may want an accessory apartment. And if we're going to encourage accessory apartments, we should let people be upfront
As long
and
as they can
say,
keep them
my mother
clustered.
is moving in.
But is the-
I don't want her in the house. I want her
In the-
out back or next to the house.
Is that solution
And I
though
love
just-
her, but
Is the
not
solution
that much.
therefore just like in the residential district that 420.3 isn't completely struck out, but that's where the other existing structure is, so it stays a conditional use? Or are you saying you want it to be
can I take a stab? I mean, if you're
Yeah,
gonna,
no, I'm just trying to understand where you want this to sit. Like, in other words, I'm going to build a accessory building behind my house. That should be something that's a permitted use, or that should be a conditional use. Like, permitted is, subdivide your house, build an addition.
Yeah.
But a conditional use is you could build a separate structure. Or are you saying all of the above should be permitted?
Well, are we saying that building something new that's attached to your house is going to be, or we're trying to make that permitted? Because I don't see that. I see that located within an existing owner-occupied single-family dwelling or an existing accessory structure.
Essex says the same thing, and I called them on it, and they said, no, that's not what we mean. I don't know why they have it in there.
I feel, well, to answer
why
your
we have
question,
it in
Andrew, I would say that, we should allow new construction, treat it the same way, whether it's attached or detached. If we want to make that, I'm okay with keeping it as a conditional use because it's a change to what's going on. But
And the
not to
neighbors
say
should-
you can add on to your building and have it as a permitted use, whereas if you have some separation, it's not. I think those
Right.
adding
So
on
strike-
or building new, either way.
so
should be-
strike both instances of the word existing. So if you had it read, accessory apartments located within owner-occupied single-family dwellings or in an accessory structure, blah, 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 it would be a permitted use in either event.
Then the accessory structure.
But just a second. I mean, I think I am understanding your concern, but if you're going to be rewriting this to incorporate this idea of Heinsberg with this scale of sizes, then you're gonna have to revisit the wording of 410.3 in all of these districts to spell this out, right? And while you're doing that, you might as well remove the words existing if what you're concerned about is people having to game in the case of an accessory structure or being told that they can't put an addition on. Because if they're going to, someone could legitimately put an addition on their house and then decide to put an accessory apartment in, and are you gonna really make it harder for them to get an accessory apartment approval? Just because they put an addition on? Where do you draw the line in terms of when they did that addition? Shouldn't it be that they could get an accessory apartment irrespective of whether they had to put an addition on versus not? As
That's
long
a
as
good
they're
point.
meeting, as
Yeah.
long as they're meeting
To make them
setback
both
requirements?
permitted.
Well, that's what I thought you were getting at, this idea that you shouldn't have to game to get the non-contiguous structure or to put a new building up. That's what I thought you were getting at.
How do you
And
interpret?
you do that by striking existing in
So how
both
do you
cases.
interpret 410.3 now in your office? If I say, well, even without the change at 30%, does that mean I can add 30% to my house, or I can take 30% of my existing house and turn it into an accessory structure?
We would look at the math after, what does the plan show? So if someone has a plan and it doesn't involve expansion, we might make sure the relationship between the building is correct. If someone's plan is to expand and put an apartment, the math still has to work. Because nothing would stop from doing
Right.
the addition and then coming in and getting the accessory apartment approval.
Right, okay.
We collapse it, basically.
I'm just reacting more to what Steven said, that he was saying it's not clearly stated that you could build a connected piece to the house, but it sounds like that's how you interpret that today, that
Well, it
if you're
doesn't,
expanding your house
yeah, it says.
or subdividing within an existing house without expanding, either of those just has to meet this 30% threshold.
Yeah, it says existing owner-occupied, single-family dwelling. It doesn't say a footprint. It doesn't say a square footage. I mean,
Right.
there's nothing, like, what is the dwelling? So we don't try to shave it down to the bare minimum.
Okay. And if someone said, I want to expand the size of my house in order to add a accessory dwelling, you would interpret that today and say you can only add 30% to your existing dwelling?
Right. I mean, this is, the thing that Dick mentioned about having this minimum allowed is going to help in those situations, because sometimes people look at what they can do and they go, man, that's just not worth my while.
Right.
And one way they could make it worth their while to have an addition, at least get a bigger number for their accessory apartment, is by expanding the base. So if you put an addition on while you're building this accessory apartment, then your accessory apartment might be larger and large enough to make it all make sense.
Right. Okay.
But with the 900.
And that's
foot,
what's
they may not
conditional
feel the
use
need
right
to
now.
expand their house.
If they
Correct.
have to do, right, if they're doing new construction, that would be conditional use,
Yeah,
yes.
so we, in Westford, just to, talk about a town that has been around this block a few times, we found that to be a onerous and a disincentive. And so we got rid of that, because a lot of times, that's precisely what people want to do. If they want to have, the mother-in-law or whoever come and live with them, their original house, they often have a family. Their original house is too small. They need to put an addition on. So if you've just said that in order to create an accessory dwelling, they have to go through conditional use to expand on that, I mean, that can really place some significant burdens on people in terms of getting financing and, things like that. They're just trying to do something nice for their family. So we decided to get rid of it, and we have not seen, the place go down the toilet or anything as
So
a
you got rid of
result.
the conditional use.
We got rid of you don't have to go through conditional use if you want to expand your existing house in order to create an accessory dwelling. We used to have that requirement.
Well, I would expand it further, just like you're saying. I would like to see this read that, to do a detached or an attached,
If the detached is
that's
controlled.
new construction, that it's not a conditional use, that it's a permitted use. I think that
With
just makes
minimums
sense.
and maximums.
With minimums and maximums, yeah. I think if somebody is going to, when somebody has, and this happened to us when we were over on Falls Road, that I had a mother that was failing, and we needed to house her, and we had to go through a conditional use process to build the accessory detached building, which I think looks okay. It didn't ruin the neighborhood, I think.
Well, you have a bigger yard, and it's close to the house.
But
And
still.
you replaced a
And you're
garage
stylish.
that was very close.
But still.
And it was stylish. I did see it.
It was, we had to send her to a nursing home because there was no way we were going to get that permitted that quickly, and it couldn't be guaranteed. I mean, she needed to go there anyway, it turns out, but, and it's probably good that that worked out, but other people that don't have parents that are declining as fast as that, to go through a process that might take, 6 months to a year, to find out that you can't do it, the timing is bad.
I don't mind the detached idea if it's going to be reasonably close to the existing house so that we don't increase, I'm going back to stormwater and parking, not increasing the impermeable surfaces any more than possible. All these towns require, except one, that you use the same parking area, same access. And one of them allows, I don't remember which one it was, if you're in a situation where you can't park in that area because it's too close to the road or something, you can put a secondary in. But there's only, the rest of them all require the same, maintaining the same parking areas, and they're all conscious of stormwater too. Williston and South Burlington are really big on it.
Well, we can't have two curb cuts for the same residential property, can we, in Shelburne? I know Charlotte doesn't allow it.
We don't have a curb cut ordinance per se.
Well, what most of these are saying is that they want the parking in the same place. They don't want 2 cars are parking over here and 2 cars parking here.
Well,
They
I-
want to maintain as little as possible, and I think we do too.
Yeah, I think we do. I would say that we should have something in there that says that you can't have 2 separate curb cuts off the street in order to accomplish this accessory whatever. You still have to use the same curb cut. And then parking, as far as I'm concerned, should go where it makes most sense to go. That if it has to go over, 10 feet over there and have a tree between that and the main parking area, it's probably better to have like 2 parking spaces here, 2 over here, instead of 4, like all in a big mess in one spot. I don't think we should dictate where the parking has to be, but I think it would make sense to say that you can't add a curb cut to accomplish that.
Is that basically what this existing line is in all the other towns? So in other words,
Yes,
the
they are.
driveway can only be the existing one?
Right.
What if you want to create a horseshoe driveway?
Charlotte, they don't allow that.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't know if we do either. We have so many,
We tried to on one of our projects just a year ago.
so many feet,
They wouldn't
don't
allow
we,
it.
being that,
Is
oh,
there-
maybe that's just Route 7 before you.
So the ones that
Route
exist must be
7
grandfathered in.
on
That's interesting.
The site plan
There's some
review,
interesting
but this
ones in
wouldn't,
Charlotte.
site plan review wouldn't apply to an accessory apartment. That's where there
grandfathered.
are some restrictions on curb cuts, and that is
Pre-zoning
found in the Route
estates.
7 district.
Yeah.
But there's no prohibition against a single-family, owner of a single-family home from, going to Paul and getting the approval to put in a driveway. That, there's no regulatory prohibition against that. So the single-family homeowner could have two driveways or a circular driveway or loop if Paul gives them the permit to work in the right-of-way. So that, we'd be saying, no, you can't do it for an accessory apartment, but a single-family homeowner in theory could do it. And then what would you do about a situation where they get it first and then they use the separate primarily for the accessory apartment? Other towns do have more restrictions regarding curb cuts than Shelburne. That is an area where we do not spend a lot of text, or use a lot of text. I did want to point out one thing. There's this question about in the home versus in an accessory building, a new structure. Shelburne's definition of accessory apartment, and I believe it's based on the definition of statute, a dwelling unit located within or appurtenant to. And the legal advice that the town received when we were doing these zoning changes back in 2007 or whenever it was, following the update of the plan, established that appurtenant to can include a separate structure. So what Dig is talking about, you'd be qualifying this definition if you were to say, well, you want it to be in the existing home or attached or close or something to it, because there's no restriction like that in the definition.
So appurtenant to can mean.
Can mean in a separate
detached.
structure, could mean detached, and
So
could
we
be
don't-
in the old carriage barn and whatever,
If
or
it's
a new
detached,
garage
then
with
I
something
would
cool.
hope that we would keep it within a certain number of feet from the existing structure.
It's hard
To
to-
shorten driveways, I know you're the architect and you like to put them off in a beautiful.
No, I
Setting.
don't. I believe in compactness myself.
Perfect.
Not everybody does, I think. But it makes a lot of sense to, if it's an accessory to it, but how far away from the existing building would have to
15
make
feet.
sense, would have to make sense based on where it is and on what lot. If you have a parking area here, especially in the rural district, and the house is over here, and you want to put the accessory over here, and it's 150 feet away, but it makes total sense.
Should
We
impact the
should allow
neighbor
that.
less than it does the homeowner. that's doing
Isn't
it.
that where the conditional aspect comes into it in the DRB review and why that
Right.
needs to happen?
That's why I
Well-
kind of favor deer.
Yes.
I think we could shorten that process up, though,
But isn't there a middle
and
ground
still
where?
have it be conditional. We could change the process.
But I feel, I mean,
somehow.
maybe I am missing something, but if we retained it being, if it were to be a separate structure, a non-existing structure, I know there's a whole side argument there, but if it was a separate structure, keeping that conditional, which would then force it to go through DRB to make sure that it's appropriate for the property and that sort of thing, versus if it's within an existing structure, that's not,
It's permitted.
it's permitted, which then has the impact of streamlining the approval processes.
Then
But then the scenario that Stephen brought up becomes a problem.
The conditional use.
need typology.
Time.
Right, the time.
But the time doesn't have to be as long as it, what was it when you were doing it? Was it like 2 meetings or 3 meetings or something?
I don't remember, but it can be a long time.
So to
It
make
depends
this-
on what
Shouldn't
the
take more
makeup,
than a month.
depends on the makeup of the board at the time, really. But if we're going to say that a new building or a separate building requires conditional use, but an attached building does not, you can really constrict and harm your neighbor with an attached building, maybe even more than a detached building, because the detached, you can place it where it makes sense, whereas an attached building, you've got to come off that building in a way that the circulation inside the house makes sense. So there could be, something that's already fairly close to the lot line, and you can only expand closer to the lot line.
You can't, though, you have to, well, I
You have to
don't know
comply
what
with
we're
setbacks.
going to do, but all these towns usually require that you meet all the existing setbacks.
Well, yeah, of course.
So,
So in the case of a new building, you would have to as well.
yes,
A detached building,
right.
you wouldn't be able to do something that would be against zoning regulations there. So I don't see why it should be a conditional use to do,
But we could
A
do the
detached building.
conditional use so that it's only when it's for an accessory, we can have a special conditional use just for accessories. We could have them meet with staff. They can point out the regs to them, set them up, and then they go to one meeting of DRB and yes or no,
So the definition in
instead
statute,
of going
But
through
what's-
multiple meetings.
what would the DRB use
Because it gives the neighbor the
as a
option.
guideline to say no? Like if a neighbor complains?
If the neighbor does not like where it's going, the neighbor has a right to determine if you're going to put a building in next to them.
You didn't ask your neighbors when you built your
Right.
Yes, I
accessory
did.
building.
I did. I went around and I
Did
got
you have
letters
to?
signed by every single one of them.
But did they all say we love it? I mean, maybe so, but,
Nobody was concerned.
well, okay, then you were lucky. But that's not,
But if,
that's not
but
always.
where I put mine is in the center of my
case.
lot, which did not, it didn't really impact anybody. I'm 100 feet from everybody.
so the statute, the definition of accessory
Whether you
apartment,
do or not, I mean, I don't want to pick apart your building, I shouldn't even have brought it up, but
That's all right.
But neighbors are tough to deal with sometimes.
They're a lot
And-
tougher now than they were before.
They're tougher now
It's the
than,
lowest common denominator, right? Like, all you need is one.
all you need is one, and you could have
Five
five.
that say that's
But if
lovely,
you're,
we think
if you
it's
have a
great.
permitted use and
Yeah.
you're gonna hang the building and it's going to throw shade on where my sun porch is, I should have a right to say no. But it's a permitted use, and I can't say no.
But you,
you're pointing out a problem with setbacks. If
Yeah.
what you're talking
Depends
about
on
is
how
the
tall the building
shading
is, yeah.
and/or building heights, it's not a
But why do
function
you
of
have the
accessory
right to tell
apartments.
me what I can and can't do legally within my own property, right? So it's like, whose right triumphs, right? It's a great, great philosophical debate, but, if
That's why
I,
you wanna disarm your neighbor before you start structure.
well, that's always a good policy, yeah.
So I just wanted to come back one more time to the statutory definition of accessory apartment
can you
and the
define
history.
a pertinent?
Can I define it? Not without a legal dictionary, but
Okay.
I've had it, but the.
Yeah,
some-
no, it's
the-
just a word that I'm like, I'd love
Yeah,
to know exactly
and,
what
and
that
it
means.
basically means, really closely associated with, but not necessarily inside. I mean, that's the
Okay.
end result. And the statutory protection that we're talking about also has a pertinent in it. So state law says that it says that no bylaw shall have.
Hang on a second. Yeah, Dean, can Dean finish?
Yeah, no bylaw shall have the effect of excluding as a permitted use one accessory dwelling unit that is located within or appurtenant to a single-family dwelling. So the idea of the accessory apartment being allowed in an outbuilding is set forth in statute. So you couldn't prevent someone from having a one-bedroom accessory apartment in a building that exists in Shelburne or arguably in any other place in Vermont. So this idea of differentiating between in the house versus in an accessory building is, at least according to the town's legal advice, you don't go there. Now, you can start to say, well, okay, one bedroom, that's I'll accept that, but if they want two, well, then we're gonna make them go through conditional use, and that's,
That's an interesting
well,
path,
but
yeah.
that's where we are right now. That's the current state of affairs. And I think there's one other point that really needs to be addressed, and that is, to the extent you are relying on conditional use as a way to, soften the impact, there has to be clear language that would justify a neighbor saying, we don't like it. Because frankly, the most difficult aspect of administering this section of the regulations is, for staff, is having to tell the DRB, we know there are neighbors who don't like the idea of this apartment going in, and we know that you're really tempted to say no, but there's nothing in the conditional use restrictions that allow you to say no. So get that idea out of your head. Now, if you wanted to write in some new requirements under conditional use specifically for accessory apartments, okay, you want to do that. But the idea of character of the neighborhood as a justification for saying no, the DRB shouldn't do that. It would not stand up if it was challenged. So if you really think that conditional use is the path to make this all right, then come up with specific criteria that a fair body could say, neighbor, you're right. It does have this measurable effect. Otherwise, the property owner should get the approval.
I agree. We had one project just recently where, in Burlington, where the neighbor filed an appeal back to the environmental court because the new building was going to shade her one kitchen window more than the old building that was getting taken down in its place. You can't predict what a neighbor's going to do, but you need to have some mechanism, as Dean says, where the DRB can say, that's groundless or it has grounds.
And I've argued that point, that we need to clarify as much as we can the language that the DRB works under. So I
And
agree.
it seems pretty clear right now.
I agree.
I mean, the zoning regs are pretty clear about setbacks and building height and all that stuff.
And I can certainly appreciate somebody who's bought a place or even has been in a place for a long time and doesn't like, appreciate, or want change. But the reality is things grow. And the basis for our town plan and the discussions that we've had have all had to do with, well, we have growth benchmarks that we're looking at as being part of Chittenden County. Everything's growing. We're all growing. So how do we manage that growth? And if our core tenant, which has at least been a core tenant since I've been on this commission, is that growth is to happen in the growth areas, and we want to keep the rural areas rural, then you have to find creative ways to increase growth in those growth areas, and this is a great way of doing that. Sure, it might increase traffic, but then that should be balanced out with better public transportation or interconnectivity amongst neighborhoods or any of those things that could help that. I think it's important to make sure that we're not trying to restrict something that could be controlled through another mechanism or addressed through another mechanism. Like the traffic issue, I have a really hard time buying into because, to your point, the Falls Road traffic isn't necessarily generated by the people that live on Falls Road.
No, but it affects them greatly.
Yeah.
Sure. Oh, of course it does. And I get that that's an issue, but then how can we... That gets into something that I know has been really close to Kate for a long time, is how do you increase non-motorized options or increase public transportation or create paths? The growth is going to happen one way or another, I would argue.
I would say it would only change if we drive it. And I don't know that the planning commission's job is to drive growth. I think our position, I've said it before, is to represent people who live here and do it in the best. So I'm not saying we don't do accessory apartments by any means. I'm saying that we do strongly control it. And it doesn't have to be by conditional use. I'm not arguing for conditional use. If the rules, as Steve said, or Dean, if we line out how we want it to be, then the DRB won't have a problem. Well, it won't have to go to DRB.
Right.
It
I
can
guess
be
I'm just not
permitted.
hearing
It can be permitted if, so my argument is, let's try to not impact the neighbors, not say, well, you don't have a choice, it's permitted.
But you're saying that to not impact a neighbor, you would have to
I'm not saying no.
not build at all.
No. I'm just saying that we take a lot and we do just like we did for PUDs. We just say it has to be within a certain distance of the existing house. You use the same driveway. You use as close to the original parking as you can. Leave a little latitude. But, do it in a way in neighborhoods. When you get out into the rural area, it's probably different.
But you don't have to say any of that stuff, because on a quarter-acre lot, you're totally limited by what you can possibly do on that quarter acre.
I think that's what I'm struggling with. I don't see that. I think it's important to
you
have
don't
an
know.
idea of what the extremes are, so that you can know what you're managing towards.
Falls
and
Road,
if you-
those lots are 150, 200 feet deep.
Okay.
So when people get used to being out there and there are no houses there, they bought them because of that. They can subdivide and they're half, 3/4 of an acre. So if somebody decides they want to just put a house out in the back at
They can do that
150
today,
feet,
right?
they have to subdivide now. And I don't know if we don't require PUD there, do we?
It's not a requirement, no. I mean,
No, but they do.
So if you're going to put in an accessory apartment, or just say, screw it, I'm going to subdivide my lot and build another house, either way, it's a big process you have to go through, and that growth, that thing is going to happen, because it can happen within the
It'll
rules.
happen, well, it may happen, but we also have rules that we have to look at, well, not rules, but things that we have to look out for, like stormwater. Stormwater is a big one for me. I spent 2 years putting that stupid thing together, and then the select board didn't even want to bother with it.
But this is where I think you have a lot of pieces that are coming together, because this one thing isn't, you can't,
That's why I think you need to limit how far apart these buildings can be when they're on a small lot. They need to be close together, the driveways need to be short.
But they will.
I think they would have to be
They have
by
to
the
be.
nature
On
of
a
the fact
quarter-acre
that the
lot, but
property is small.
Not all these lots are quarter-acre lots. All the lots are not created equal.
Even on a 2/3 acre lot, I mean, I don't know how you can say that it's got to be, 15 feet or whatever, or if you say 50 feet, I mean,
If
that's,
it's 75
also
feet
end up with
wide
some
and
really
it's
crappy
180 feet long,
outcomes if
you don't
you-
have to put a house out here, you can still put it in.
well, if somebody
comfortably
takes a
close.
long skinny lot, like they have done on Falls Road, and subdivides it this way, and has the long driveway this way next to their existing house.
Which is exactly
to
what
put here.
happened.
That's a subdivision, and I'm going to guess that they're doing it because they, don't want to live there, or because they're ruining their house, basically, in order to have that house behind it. But a subdivision, they have to be really intending to do that. It's a costly process. It's, $15,000, $20,000 just to get, all the plats made up and the design work and all that stuff. So somebody has to really want to do a subdivision in order to do that. We're not trying to create affordable housing by saying subdivide.
Apartment, we're not talking about building houses, we're talking about accessory apartments, supposedly family, you're gonna be close together.
The reason that came up is because you had made the point about in the Falls Road area that they're quarter-acre lots, and that
No, it's
somebody-
quarter acre zoning.
Quarter-acre zoning, so it could
Right.
result in quarter-acre lots. Everything
It
in the
could,
Falls
yes.
District's worst-case scenario, you could have a house on every quarter-acre, right?
No, not necessarily, because there are restrictions. That whole area of Falls Road is like a peninsula. The river goes around it. The whole left-hand side, the east side, no, I'm just saying what I know. It's all
my point is,
wetlands.
so
It's
think of
all
the
wetlands.
parallel of the
So I'm
rural
thinking of
district.
this property because I know exactly how it works.
That's great.
The right-hand
But-
side is all springs, yet we had no problem at all doing a subdivision here last summer. They put it right down over a hill, full of springs, and then they put it on the wetland that
Which should
drains
have
it directly
violated
into the
all
river.
kinds of issues then.
It does, but
because you
yet-
can't build on a wetland. So, but that in itself is not caused by
So we could do
this.
the same thing
Right.
with your
It's-
Yeah,
accessory
like,
use.
these are other
Jason's point
issues that you're
is
trying to
right.
fold in here, and when you point out that there's stormwater considerations and all that, there was a lot of talk put into stormwater into the plan as well.
Right, right.
We can't have every single bylaw reference every single thing that we need referenced. That's why we have stormwater regulations that do need to be beefed up. We have setback issues and buffer issues that we do address. So this is a thing that then falls into that whole framework. And I agree with you, those are issues. They're definitely valid issues, but I don't see in this one why this would be a showstopper.
We're also looking at Falls Road as something in a microscope. This, we're talking about across the board adjustments to the zoning regs here.
To
And-
each one except for rural, right?
It's except for rural?
No, I think
Or
we're
rural
included
is
as well.
something- Oh, yeah.
Yeah, rural's in here too.
It doesn't, well, there would not be any accessory apartment allowance in the commerce and industry zone because single-family homes are not allowed, and there are no existing single-family homes in the commerce and industry district. In the commerce and industry south, new homes are not allowed, but there are some existing single-family homes, which under statute should have the ability to create an accessory
I kind
apartment.
of question the museum district too. What is there, like 4 houses in the museum district?
But we still have to cover
Do they
all the
not-
districts. We can't discriminate against
Is
the 4
French
houses.
Village in the museum district, or is that separate?
Yeah.
It is.
I didn't see one.
If, we can't stop people from doing something terrible.
Yeah, there is.
If we can, at some point, I would
I'm not
like
saying
to
terrible, I'm
open,
just saying a little respect for the neighbors, that's all I'm asking for.
that we can't put that into a statute, I don't think. I mean, if we want to increase the supervisory power of the Historical Commission and Design Review Board, then that's another
I would like
another
to see what
thing,
they
and
have to say about
I'd
it.
welcome that, but that's not, we're not talking about that either.
I'd like to hear what their comment is on the village. Did you guys go to them?
Well, the DRB, you have to remember, is a quasi-judicial body, and any time that you go to the DRB suggesting that the DRB should be setting policy puts the DRB in a really tough position because they shouldn't be setting policy. They're applying the policy that you folks create.
Right.
I was just trying to think about ways forward and whether or not there's any sense of a center here or further discussions with the housing subcommittee or Dick meeting with the housing subcommittee or
I
coming
don't think
to.
I'm that far apart, really.
Yeah, no, I think there's some really good ideas in discussion. I think it's pretty clear that we're not going to be passing or pushing this forward tonight. But I would like to explore those. And if we could summarize them, like things like adding the min-max, I mean, at this point, are we saying that these things could be permitted, or are you thinking something should be
It
conditional?
worries me about making them permitted. Not all of them. I don't know, let me chew on it. I really don't mind it so much if the sizes are contained. And we do have some minimum standard of, some sort of not putting them out in the, keeping an accessory closer to the home. That's my major concern. That's really it in a nutshell. The traffic thing, it's not gonna get any better on Falls Road, I know that.
Well, and
That's not gonna happen either.
even the idea of keeping it close to the house, and I'm in favor of compact as well. I'm not saying that it's a bad thing, but I think it gets more into if somebody has a piece of property, if they wanted to put an accessory structure on it somewhere that's not right next to the main house. I mean, that's not going to happen necessarily on a quarter-acre lot, but what's the biggest zoning area that you could have in a non-rural area? I don't know that.
Well, the residential size is 20,000, and then the next up was rural, so it's half an acre, basically, 20,000 square feet.
Okay.
There's nothing in between.
So, yeah, and then that gets into the,
But there are lots in between.
Oh, there are
Yeah,
lots,
yeah.
yes. I thought you were asking about the zoning size.
zoning size for a property. So
Right.
if you have a half-acre lot, which is what we're talking about in general, right? Outside of the rural district, then and there's going to be a house on that half-acre lot, and if the accessory structure goes somewhere else, it would still need to be within all of the setbacks and wetlands or any of the other issues that we have, which is why this didn't strike me as a big issue. I'm not trying to say it's not a concern or valid concern. I just,
What if we
It's just
use
not
like a
very far.
PUD standard,
Yeah.
but not a PUD per se?
But I don't get the closeness though, because what if I mean, you are in the, say, growth area 2, but you happen to have a pre-existing pretty big lot, a couple acres, 2, 3. and you want to put a little accessory structure out there, but you want to set it further away from
You're
your
zoned,
house.
so you can do that anyway.
Right.
You wouldn't be doing it, you wouldn't have to do an accessory.
And Dick, what if you're,
But you want to build an accessory. So,
Oh,
in
you
other words,
could-
you don't want to subdivide, you just want to put an accessory on there.
What
Why
if-
does it have to be, the whole point of if I have a
Right.
big lot and I want to put it farther away so they have privacy, we have privacy, why does it have to be close to my house?
And maybe that benefits the
To-
neighbors also.
I know stormwater is a small thing, but it's a small thing.
But
It
may-
is a small thing in
To your
one
point of the
driveway,
neighbors,
but
it could be
in
better for the
100
neighbors
driveways,
because
it's
now this accessory is set way back, not close to the two neighbors whose houses are near me.
No,
You know what I mean?
it's-
Like,
Could go closer to a neighbor.
I think the whole idea of mandating it be near the house is,
I think it should be less
Short-sighted, and it
impact
should
to the
just be a-
neighbor than it is to
it
the
has
guy
to
building it.
conform to
That's
existing
kind of
setbacks and
common
rules,
sense.
period.
But Dick, like I was saying, the statutory protection extends to a one-bedroom accessory apartment in an existing building that's not the house itself. So someone could have that 2.5 acre, or 3 acre, or 4 acre lot and say, I've got a
Accessory
plan.
building.
They could
That's-
build the accessory structure. It could be right at 15 feet from the property line, and then they could come in and the town would be required to give them
Which is why
a
we should
permit.
date this whenever it goes through, and it should be from that point forward. No new accessory structures to be built and converted.
That just seems
I'm not sure that you.
That goes
so
against everything we
complicated.
want to do.
Yeah.
yeah.
It does.
Absolutely.
So Dean's just talking about a loophole, and we don't want to fill it.
Well, I'm not sure that I think of it as a loophole. I
It's
mean,
just a
I-
process you have
it's
to
a
go through, and we want to
maintenance
shorten that process and say, you should come up front and say, I'm building an accessory structure, it's going to
it's
be used as an
it's the
accessory structure.
statutory protection that I'm getting at, Dick, is that the community has to deal with the fact that the legislature says that someone who has a single-family residential property has this right to create a one-bedroom or efficiency accessory apartment either in their house or in an accessory building, a building that's pertinent to.
And that's part of our regs now.
Yeah, and I mean, that's part of the definition and that's part of the state statute. I mean, unless
if-
someone was going to come up with some kind of argument that said a pertinent stops being a pertinent at a certain distance, and I don't know who would do that or how they would do that, but that's maybe what you're saying is that it's no longer got enough connection to the house to meet the statute.
What I think, Dick, you're trying to, the solution of setting a distance to the house is one way to do what you're after, which is like to make it make sense and not create sprawl and all that stuff. But if you look at, all the other cases Andrew brought up where, say, you have a house here, the driveway comes in here, you want to put the accessory over there so that there's more privacy, and maybe all your neighbors are over here. That's better for your neighbors, but that's farther away than you would want.
So
But
what
at the
happens if the
same,
guy wants to subdivide? Is that still an accessory structure?
well,
or
wait,
what?
that's a whole other thing. Let's,
That's a whole different thing, right?
that,
But what
say,
if you want to subdivide after you put the accessory in?
Dick,
Well, yeah, let's-
Dick,
Let's
say,
follow
say,
one
say,
line of logic, please.
say you want to put an accessory structure on a large lot that's along your driveway, but closer to the street.
That's fine.
But it's farther than 15 feet away. It could be like 500 feet away because you got a big, long driveway, your house is over here.
Damage is already done. I see that one.
So the 15
I think it's a
feet,
case-by-case scenario, but we should move on, because
Well, right, but
we
I don't
can
want to
get-
move on where nothing's accomplished. Like,
I think
wanna-
everything is accomplished if we start writing things down. The
We-
minimum, the maximum.
Well, I am writing things down, Dick, and I do
Okay.
have admin max,
So I would say
but then I
do
wasn't
what-
sure about proximity because
I've made my arguments. I'm going to live with whatever the commission comes up with, so let's just move
Right,
forward.
well, that's fair, but if your point, and you alluded to it earlier, is to say, okay, well, I said my piece to the planning commission, I'm gonna wait until the select board has the plan up for approval, and then I'm gonna bring up some issues that screws everything up. You're not making any friends here.
I'm only talking about one issue, and I'm going to ask them to think about the housing development, which I've been arguing about for years. And in fact, some of the members of that commission know about it already. They sat here.
Okay,
So I'm not going in there with a list of stuff.
okay.
can
I
I
have one
go-
item, only one item.
Can I just ask a question about that statute that you read?
yeah, I can pull it up so
Is-
people can see it.
Is that a town statute or
No,
state?
state statute that basically says, the way the planning statute is written, there are things that municipalities zoning must do. It's anyways 44.
But it doesn't say anything about the accessories being in a pre-existing building, right? By the state statute. And if I got that right, then there's no way ours should say that it has to be in a pre-existing.
Well, the original one was an accessories.
It said appurtenant too, but
think
I
it's-
didn't remember seeing a pre-existing building being
They had square footage
anything
originally too.
in there.
It was guaranteed.
No, well, there was. No, mine would be a whole separate thing.
The original state one had a guarantee.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Yeah,
4412. It's the required provisions and prohibited effects is what it is. And so these are things that state law says, if you're going to have zoning, you have to have these required provisions, or you have to make these specific accommodations. And so we are looking at paragraph E. And yeah, there's this introductory language that deals with flood hazard zones, but basically pick up at the no bylaw shall have the effect of excluding as a permitted use one accessory dwelling unit that is located within or pertinent to an owner-occupied single-family dwelling. So what you were asking, does it talk about existing? It doesn't, it does not say that, but if a community said, aha, well, it doesn't prohibit us from, as a town, to say,
oh yeah.
You
in
can only-
F, yeah, nothing in subdivision, or subdivision, whatever, of this section shall be construed to prohibit a
oh, so you-
bylaw that requires conditional use for
more than one bedroom. So basically,
for a new accessory structure.
if
it doesn't
that's right.
prohibit you.
If the community wants to do what Shelburne did, what the consultant who was working with Shelburne before was trying to do was to have the zoning regulations match the statute. And so what the statute says is that if a town wants to make it a conditional use when there's a new accessory structure for that accessory apartment, then they can do that. But I'm still not sure that the statute couldn't be gamed in the same way that zoning could be gamed by having someone get the permit for the accessory structure when they then come in for the accessory apartment.
I see. So we might as well,
But there's a
that would say we
difference.
might as well make it a permitted use rather than conditional use.
There's a difference there too. There's an accessory dwelling unit and then a new accessory structure, which is
Well, they reference this new accessory structure. I'm trying to
Structures,
follow the logic.
sheds,
of nothing in
garages. Some of these are listed here.
Yeah, so
some towns
if a
only
town
allow so
wants to
many
have it
accessory
to be more
structures.
generous, it
Right.
can.
Yeah,
And if
but
they want
what's
to
your
use
point on
conditional
that?
use
Well,
review,
I'm just saying that
it can. And it's
I
specifically
think it's I
saying
says a
when,
new
if you want to have
accessory
conditional use
structure.
apply when it's a
not
new structure,
necessarily
you
that-
can.
that's-
Okay.
I don't know
That's
if
what
we're
we
talking
do.
about a
Or
living
when
unit.
it's more floor area
Right
of
above
the
it, it
building,
says-
like
This is
I was
part of
talking
that
about earlier,
section
or
about
Board
the
Park.
living units.
So with this, recognizing the time, clearly something that requires a bit more discussion, I would think. We've identified the min-max, we've identified that, at least on a one-bedroom side, we can't do anything that's gonna go against what the state says. So, do you wanna pursue some dialogue with the housing committee to just see if there can be a bit more tightening of things, or come to some agreeable type of thing?
I'd be glad to.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind meeting with them either, if we could do that.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, I think I have it in my, I think it's January 7th.
I have a fairly free schedule now.
Congratulations.
Can I just
Right.
question, so
Yes.
have we gone away from the
necessarily.
50% and we're back to the 30%?
I wouldn't
Or are
even-
we getting rid of a percentage and just having a min-max?
I think you'd still need to have the percentage and have the min-max just be brackets.
That's which one of those you guys
but-
want to go for?
Yeah, the 30 versus 50, I mean, I can't say that I'm a big fan of formulas in general, just because it starts to complicate. When you hear it from a developer or a business owner, they're like, yeah, I looked at it and what does this mean?
Right, yeah.
Which may not be a valid excuse, but
So can you just go with a min max? In other words, it has to be between 900 and 1,500 or 1,200.
No,
it
because
doesn't
then
have
if
to
you have a
be-
900-foot house, then they build a 1,500-foot or square foot accessory apartment, which I think would violate something else in here, but
Well, the min is a guaranteed, like. you
Minimum
can at least have a
guarantees, they
900,
can have 900,
But you
they
can
don't
build a
have to.
600, so
Yeah.
you don't have to.
Yeah.
so that, I mean, I would say that this good conversation to come out with these types of concepts, and then if, I mean, I would too if I'm available as well, but just to, if there's an opportunity to sit in with the housing subcommittee and talk through this a little bit and see if we can narrow it down and come up with some common language. Because I think everybody's coming at it with good intentions. We just need to figure out what's the magical recipe here.
Yeah.
So we do have a housing subcommittee meeting scheduled for 6 PM on Monday, January 7th.
That's easy to remember.
Why, is it your birthday or something?
No.
I know, that's what I was thinking, it was his birthday. 1/7,
He's
What time?
6 PM.
Is that here?
Yep, usually in the kitchen.
kitchen staff room.
I can, I think I can
I
make that.
apologize for the cell phone.
You can make that?
Yeah, I
Excellent,
did it too.
that'd be great.
And so with that, if we can do that, then should we move forward with just pushing through the bylaw change report for the LCT?
I would encourage you to at least consider it, and part of the reason why I'm saying that is we like to try to bundle amendments, and the schedule that the select board developed for the PUD amendments, which they've already received, has that hearing happening far enough away
Oh,
that
this could
this
sneak into
could
that.
possibly catch it.
Yeah, let's do that then. Okay, and that. Yeah, yes, thank you very much, man.
Yeah, good night.
Great discussion.
Yeah.
So is that this motion then?
Yeah, that's what I was just looking for. That was in the beginning, right? You wanna
Yeah.
Go for it.
That's a pitch.
Do you want me to read this one?
Yeah.
Do we need this? Is that language, is that the date that we'd be targeting?
Yeah, the date that I put in, January 10, would be.
So I move to direct staff to warn a public hearing to be held on January 10th, 2019 regarding amendment of the zoning bylaw. The amendment, if enacted, would modify language to allow as nonconformities subject to conditional use review, limited expansion of structures encroaching on front and/or side yard setbacks in the rural zoning district, as reflected in documents previously distributed and labeled A, and hereby approved for discussion at a public hearing.
Do we have a second?
Second.
So motion by Andrew, second by Suzanne. All in favor? Aye.
And then read the next part too. I move to approve the zoning change report dated December 16th, 2018 and labeled A, and direct staff to distribute said report and copies of the amendment proposal as required by statute.
The 6th, you said 16th, I think.
Oh, sorry, December 6th, 2018.
Second.
Moved by Andrew, seconded by Stephen. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. So now we can move on to the annual work plan
About the
discussion. Do a what?
Electric car? Electric?
Maybe make a choice.
Oh, did I skip one? I did.
Do
Sorry.
you want to talk about electric cars
let's have a-
more than you'd
Yeah.
like to talk about?
That's true. I mean, is there a time sensitivity to either one of those? I mean, I'm sure there's interest in the work plan, but that's going to happen anyway.
Yeah, that was really to like get people thinking about it,
Yeah.
but I think that either one is fine.
All right. Yeah, let's do the electric cars then. I would be interested in thoughts on how to approach the work plan if anybody has them. Wouldn't mind emailing or something because that could go into our next discussion. So on electric vehicles, The language that you had in here that was pulled from the suggested language for the most part, right?
So the document that the state produced is kind of interesting. It's not very compact. So what I did was really just to try to get it closer together in one place and propose one way it might show up in the bylaw, but there's nothing special about it. And it could be through the addition of a paragraph or a section in 1980.10. And anyway, I had just pulled together some of the different ideas into one place. But I don't want to discourage you from walking through the document or the parts of it. I included the stuff that was more specific to regulations. Just additional background, I did reach out to the planner in Williston. He was one of the people on the advisory committee that created this document, thinking that perhaps that Williston had already done some zoning changes to reflect this. They haven't yet, aside from some things in their parking requirements. So they've started to tackle this in their parking requirements, but they haven't really done it in the way that this document recommends. They're also waiting for some work to be completed by the Regional Planning Commission, and the Regional Planning Commission is also developing language for them on some of these things. So maybe it will make a little sense to see what the Regional Planning Commission comes up with. He wasn't ready to share it with me. He, the planner.
Right. Yeah, I mean, if everybody went through the presentation, if there's any particular questions, we could certainly address that. I mostly just had a couple of comments on this language that was pulled from here. So if we want to do maybe a quick run through the presentation, or just hit each slide if somebody has any questions, or do we? Because didn't we have this in a previous packet as well?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it doesn't need to be anything in depth unless there are questions. And to say it out loud, I think my thought process of just doing a quick run through the presentation would orient to be able to talk about the actual language. And I imagine that the point of this would be mostly just to get a temperature and just see where we feel and if there's anything we should be thinking about for next time. And in that time, the
Yeah.
the regional may have their stuff together.
So, yeah, in the packets, I believe, I cut out a lot of the background material and focused in, starting on page 10, I believe it was. But it's summarizing by explaining the importance of defining. The proposal is to say that charging stations would be an accessory use. That's kind of a core idea. Number 3, I don't really think so much is something that you'd want to tackle, at least initially, and that would be to allow charging stations as a principal fueling station, but use specific criteria. Shelburne's peculiar because we don't allow gas stations. The only ones that are here, that are allowed, are the ones that are here. And so I figured that in terms of what I gave you as stuff to chew on, I would put aside that topic for now. Keeping it simple, making it allowable and administrative in nature, that would be good. Parking standards is something I think is, it's valuable, but I'm not sure that it would necessarily be the first step that you would have to take. Sign standards I don't think is necessarily the most crucial part of this, or also the performance standards. But the definition the definition recommendation I just pulled into the document I gave you, allowing as accessory uses and as accessory structures is something that I pulled in because that's a pretty core part of this. The principal fueling stations, like I said, maybe not addressed right now because of our kind of weird situation. Keep it simple, and it would be administrative in nature, like I said. Parking standards, again, this is maybe a second generation attempt if you were looking to make a mark initially and signal to communities that it's easier, to people in the community that it's easier to have these things. So like a Kevin or some existing business where the question arises, well, how do EV charging facilities come into play for that kind of use? Well, if the zoning regulations make it clear that it's accessory, then you have a very clear path to approval. And it's a simple approval. Signage stuff, I didn't, again, see it as a really big issue. Performance standards, I didn't necessarily
The thing
see.
about signage, I think, is the regular cars have to be trained to understand that this, so the signage needs to be clear enough to say, you can't park here unless you have an electric vehicle, and these are the repercussions if you do.
Right. Agreed. You definitely want it to be, the facility to be there for the electric cars and not to be used by non-electric cars. Yeah, so, I mean, what, were you thinking to help people or go more slowly through the individual pages?
No, it was mostly just to be able to acknowledge what those topics were, to give people an opportunity to raise anything. The sample language, since we're not in a case of looking to push anything through, this is more informational and to get us thinking about where we might want to dive in. Some of the considerations that I had on the 1980.10 suggestion was maximum number of stations per lot. Mostly, and I don't really feel strongly one way or the other, but mostly just thinking that this becomes more an issue of the structure of the charging station itself, because we don't regulate outlets or anything like that that people can have. So it's more making something like this available, and I appreciated all of this stuff where make sure that, pedestrians aren't going to trip over things, and that signage, and making sure that there would be consequences for a non-EV parking and not charging, that kind of thing. But really just around the maximum number of stations per lot on a single family. In the comment, there was 3 or 5 on commercial without paved parking, 10 on commercial with paved parking. Is that something where, would it behoove us to just let that be a market-defined thing?
It certainly could be. My reason for calling it out was that if there was some size that just became more of an attraction, if it started to be like a pseudo charging facility, it attracted in a large number, then you might want to have some limit on the number of spaces to keep it consistent with the idea of accessory. But it could be market driven. And I think that the idea of maximum per lot is somewhere in some of the material I read. And I know the maximum footprint was one of those ideas as well.
Yeah, something for consideration along there, and this is more, I suppose, with single family, but maybe not. In the point 4 about the permit review process, there was sample language that said the installation of an EV charging station within a public right-of-way. Landowners would not need to obtain a zoning permit for an installation of a charging station within a public right-of-way. And I think that combined with just seeing 3 on a single family, the thought of, well, I don't, but if I happen to live off on Route 7 or something, and I could put in a charging station that has one of those card readers or something, and I could advertise that, and people could just stop in or whatever, like that just seemed, if there were businesses nearby, I could see that as being something that might trigger neighbors or whatever might go on.
I think this is kind of a ragged part of this particular document, the idea of not needing a permit for a charging station within a right-of-way. They kind of bungled, because it's the normal idea would be a property owner doesn't get the ability to put something in the right-of-way. So it's less that we would want to write this as saying, oh, you don't need a permit to put something in the right-of-way. Well, but then there are all these other things that keep you from doing that. So I think really this would be a more helpful document if it made it clear that the idea isn't that these things will go in the right of way, because that's the public space. It's the place for the sewer lines and the water lines and everything else that's within that space that's controlled by the public. You may have a deed that says that your property goes to the center of the road, but from the center of the road to the edge of the right of way, you have very little control over, you get your mailbox there, but not much else. You can't put a sign there.
And actually, even just saying that now, that just seems like a small use case anyway. But, yeah, that was really the thing that jumped out at me otherwise.
I'm more curious about that scenario, like, because the on-street parking, is that a homeowner is going to do that, or is that more just that a business might sort of be able to put them in the street parking in front of their building to attract people?
I feel like these would be the discussions that we would need to have, and I would suggest that in an existing parking lot kind of thing, if it's street parking, I think that gets into a lot of other issues with plows and
Yeah.
other
I'm much
considerations.
better at sort of real-life scenarios. So say you have the Brugger's parking lot. Are you indicating that, and maybe I'm totally missing something here, but you could theoretically have as many as 10 spots just for charging, which would significantly restrict a very congested lot already?
Well, and this is partially is where I was thinking that this could almost be a kind of a market-driven type of thing, because
it
of,
is market-driven.
like if I ran Brugger's, I wouldn't think to take a big chunk of all of my spots and say make them EVs unless I wanted my clientele to become EV drivers.
Well, you maybe do too.
And maybe you do. But yeah, I think that would be something that, like with any business, if you're planning out what you want to do in order to attract or create amenities for your customers, that would just go into that consideration.
That scenario would be landlord-driven anyway.
Well, and that's right, whoever owns the building.
But also that have to be somebody who's going to want their patron to stay there for
Right.
an hour and a half or however long it's going to take them to really charge their car. And that, I
like
think
the
there'd be
qualities.
a market disincentive to have too many charging stations because it uses up all your parking.
Right.
I mean, I think there's an incentive for places like the Tap House there in Brugger's to have something, to offer it, because, one of the things, like even with a super fast charging, like supercharging with my Tesla, it can take 15 or 20 minutes. You get a ton of juice back, but that gives me time to go get a sandwich, get a snack, so the idea of like, hey, we're coming through Shelburne, we got to charge, let's stop for lunch. Ooh, the Shelburne Tap House has an EV charging station. I can park there, charge for 45 minutes to an hour while I'm getting my lunch. That's part of why Tesla's giving away these destination type chargers, right? So I did that the other day. I was coming back from Massachusetts up Route 7, saw that Middlebury had some publicly accessible charging at Marble Works
They're
there.
great, aren't they?
Yeah,
I've used that one.
yeah, so there's a Tesla destination charger. We stopped and we went and frequented a bunch of businesses there, and we wouldn't have, other than knowing that charger was there, I wouldn't have gone to those businesses that were adjacent. So, I think there's some incentives for places like restaurants, especially people, they want you to get out of your car and walk around and patronize them. I know the mobile station in the center of town was talking to me about putting one in their little lot there somewhere, knowing that they'd get a little bit of business for buy your heady topper, get your sandwich, whatever, but also knowing that it might benefit Kevin's place and other things that
Sure.
are around.
Well, that
The
makes
library
sense to
wants,
me.
yeah, and the
right.
library, of course, they talked to us about the 2, right, that they want to put in there. But yeah, it seems like it would be an advantage. I was just more curious about, within Shelburne, trying to think of like where are the places that it would make sense. I think it's where there are restaurants and or tourist destinations. The Shelburne Museum already has electric vehicle only parking, I believe, right? Hybrid or electric, closer to the thing, so you can park right at the entrance. But that would be I would think that would be a no-brainer for them, the farms, to put some of these things in and want them.
Do you find yourself waiting at times?
I haven't, no. I mean, that's a beautiful thing about an electric car is that these stations are for the edge case mostly, travel. You know, you do 95% or more of your charging in your garage or your driveway every night. You know, I can charge every day basically at home if I want to. But it's when you're traveling. What I found is that I search these things out, and then the businesses that offer them, they're going to get my business. So I think there's some attractant for some places in Shelburne, or Shelburne as a town, to say, hey, there's some. I mean, the Middlebury ones are free. You know, the Marble Works, I think, is just maybe all collectively doing, or it's town of, I'm not sure. You know, but that was even more incentive. I also had to stop in Bennington at one point, and it was a charge point one I had to pay. It was kind of an inconvenient location, not close to what we wanted to do, and it was a pain in the ass. So, you know, strategically located ones in Shelburne could actually make people say, oh, I'm gonna make sure I stop there on my way in and out of Burlington or whatever.
Definitely see benefits. Are there any, are there any objections to once CCRPC has that language together to have this on a future agenda where we can formalize it and move forward?
I think that's, I don't have an objection to it. The only thing that I would want them to clarify a little bit is the accessory structure standards that they refer to here. Some towns, and I know Burlington allows you to put an accessory structure closer to your property line than any other building in the house. So they say.
One of my notes, Stephen, is that is a needed addition, is an exception to setbacks for these types of structures.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I wonder if there's some, again, I'm not operating fully, since it's getting late, but if there's some lots that we could just totally, protect is the wrong word, but not have any charging stations in because there's so little parking in the village. It's a problem when there's a baseball game and a dance troupe. And, there are serious parking issues from time to time, and there's a farmer's market. I mean, you can't find anywhere to park. And so if there was a bunch of spots that most people can't use at this point in time, that would become extremely frustrating.
Yeah, and that's part of the rationale for having some of the structure, like I say, with a number of stations per parcel, is that you would, these things are, you want to accommodate them, but you're not trying to see a wholesale change in the nature of a parking lot. So if you're doing something, up to 9 or 10 on a pave, you just come in and it's a piece of paper and you walk out with it and you can do it. But if you're going to do something more, then wherever we draw the line, then it's a longer process, and these kinds of questions could be asked. If there's no number at all, and you let the market drive it, then yes, the impact could conceivably be that lots become accessible only to electric cars. Now, societally, that's saying, here's the incentive to get an electric car. But it will affect people that are not driving electric cars until they buy them.
And you see, as an electric car driver, you'll see places that are clearly signed, branded, and cars just park in them anyway. So I think the impact is more likely to be negative on EV drivers who are, what we say, iced out of the spots they're supposed to park in by cars who block it than internal combustion engine cars not having a place to park at all. I just don't see the market driving such massive numbers of EVSEs that they're going to take away parking spots. I think it's going to be a 1Z here, 2Z here, that people will use.
Yeah, no, I just think that there's some areas, like across from the country store, where, I just think where
Right, and
we should be very careful about.
Yeah, that would be a perfect thing where that would be the type of scenario, I think, where you could have a charging station.
But aren't there different types of charging stations? Like some are really quick and others are, like you have short-term parking, 15 minutes only, 30 minutes only. You see that all the time in,
And the providers often will enforce that if they're pay providers. You know,
Yeah.
you're paying for a charging session that is 30 minutes.
and
you
it
know,
seems like
no
you could
longer.
calibrate the charging stations to that time constraint, where you wanted to have it.
There's nothing to keep you, I think, from staying 5 hours at a charging station if you only need a 15-minute charge.
Right. And the
So-
other question, I
and
mean, the
that's
question-
a whole
The main
like,
questions I had are around like,
regulation kind of thing that has to be dealt with somehow.
But
I
you,
think
you get a
if we're
parking
talking-
ticket if you were to do
Oh, you
that with
would?
a regular, yeah, I was thinking you could get a parking ticket like you would if you were in a 15-minute parking zone and you were there for, you went off to go have lunch for 2 hours, you'd get a parking ticket, right? If you weren't there, you could do the same thing.
Well, we don't
So-
have,
Raises
That'd be-
other issues, but
Right,
yeah.
but I just
No,
think,
that's a
I
good
think we're going to
concept,
be
yeah.
evolving towards
Sure.
that, because it's going to become more,
As the
there's,
town
it's going to
grows,
become
right?
more
Needs to be a
common.
universal post or something you could stick out.
Yeah.
my assumption would be
You
that
know,
most
with
of
a
these,
color or something on it that will tell you there's a
That there's a-
parking in the back here.
Yeah.
I mean, my assumption too is there's, most of these, the E EVSEs would be paid ones done with third party, or are we saying these are types of things that the town might put in for free, to incent people? So
Yeah.
if it's these professional ones, then there usually are these limitations on you're paying for a 30-minute session or
my take on this is that there would have to be something significant would have to change for the town to say it wanted to take on the responsibility of taking public spaces and making them electric.
Right.
So that's why my focus is all on private property.
Yeah.
Right.
Because there's gonna need to be a big
The town can't
discussion.
even get it together to efficiently use the public rights of way as it is for regular parking. There's no way they're gonna, this is years off.
Right.
So I don't think this is something we have to worry
Yeah,
about.
so Susanna, you're concerned about something across from the country store. That's all public parking out there. So that, I agree, Kate, I agree that it will be a long time before the
Right.
town actually puts in charging stations other than something at the library. That's,
The world is changing.
Right.
And maybe this is the
Country
time
store
to
could put
segue into.
Segue, good segue.
The country store could put one in their little back lot.
They could,
Right.
they could. Because don't you, you find these things with an app or something, right?
Right.
Doesn't every,
Yep.
with an EV have an app?
So,
Yeah.
other business, good segue. That, for the energy,
Yeah, the climate economy is.
yeah.
Which one are we talking about?
Talking about that.
We're gonna skip over the work plan. We'll do
Okay.
that at a future one. And we're moving on to other business. And the Vermont Climate Economy Initiative has been making waves
Yeah,
lately.
a few different people around Shelburne have contacted me independently to ask about Shelburne's possible interest in this program that's operated by the Vermont Council on Rural Development. And the Vermont Council on Rural Development is an organization that has as its mission, I'm not going to try to say it, but they focus on helping rural areas solve rural problems, and they get some of their funding from the federal government, from the Department of Agency for Department of Agriculture, and they do a lot of different activities. And they have this program that is called the Climate Economy Model Communities Program that's been running, I think, for 3 years or 2 years now. That, like I say, people are asking me about because there is a deadline coming up in the middle of January, and they're wondering whether or not Shelburne should think about applying. And I mentioned this to Jason, and I've been contacted by people like Roz Graham, who used to work at Shelburne Farms. The goals, help communities build and implement priority actions that increase economic vitality and affordability in a time of climate change. Ultimate goal is to help communities model rapid change by implementing energy efficiency, transportation system transformation, renewable energy. You can read all these things, but it's a pretty all-encompassing set of goals, but with the core being these: home and business energy efficiency, energy transformation, whatever that means, and renewable energy generation. and transportation system improvement. So this kind of stuff that we're talking about, Shelburne finally, getting its act together to say, hey, we want to be part of energy transformation, and we want to assign some of our parking spaces for EVs. That's kind of a signal of that. And transportation systems improvement, I think of things like complete streets and multimodalism and more access for non-motorized vehicles. But then it goes on, it could be many other things: smart growth development, working lands, business vitality, and so on. So we were just, there are more people talking about this, reactions. The Energy Committee has a lot of ideas in the comprehensive plan that fit with this. I think the case would be good, that Shelburne could make. Some of the language that came up in the comprehensive plan, some of the ideas, conversion of heating systems, community net metering, a lot of energy stuff, a lot of transportation stuff, rural economy stuff. What do people think?
Well, what's the, how does this get?
How does it work?
Yeah, how does it work?
So the Council on Rural Development has been known for a number of years for doing what they call these community visits. And they have somewhat similar structures, but they've done them kind of generally, and they've done some for the creative economy. But the idea is that they look for a group to come together as a steering committee to plan for a major public meeting, and the target is to have 150 people there. And the Vermont Council on Rural Development has facilitators and people who help structure that meeting. The goal of that is to get people to identify ideas, to start to prioritize them, and create task force. And I talked with the guy who prepared the application for Middlebury, and has really been the guy who's led that effort, who's a former legislator. And basically, if 3 people have an idea, then you create a task force for it. And it's really kind of a market approach to problem solving. The good ideas will last. People will be interested in them, and you basically go where the energy is. It's very bottom up. You don't try to have an idea in advance of what the things will be. Now, it kind of contradicts the fact that there are these cores, so you definitely have to set this up so that you are trying to promote these things. But you could come out of that meeting with 10 different task forces that are working on things. Part of me wonders whether or not those charging stations in the Marble Works are a result of this. In terms of funding, it doesn't really bring money to the town, but it helps really play matchmaker. The town, as part of this big meeting, gets introduced, and people who run other funding programs will come to the meeting, and they'll be there, and you can talk directly to that person from this, that, or the other funding agency, so people will know where to go. And then the other aspect of this funding is that some of this stuff, the utilities, and Jason may know this sort of thing better than I do, the utilities are already required to do some investments in communities already under our utility regulation system. So one of the things that can happen is that by prioritizing, the community could say to the utilities, well, instead of working on something generally, what we really want you to do in Shelburne is X. And that could be something that Vermont Gas is responsible for, electric company.
I have to say, I really like this idea, and I see it as something that could start to bring to life some of the things we talked about in our brand-new plan. And one of the things I was most heartened by with that entire process was how many people came to our meetings. I've been on the Planning Commission now for more than 10 years, and so I've been through a couple of rounds of these things, and you usually only get people coming when you've done something controversial, and they're there, usually quite angry with you about something. So that was just such an amazing kind of like civic reset for me that was very welcome. So I have been thinking about how to leverage that and get more people interested. I mean, we have this ad hoc housing committee, we have the ad hoc energy committee, and to sort of expand on that, bring more people in. And the other thing is that I think that just like the housing thing that we discussed tonight. You know, Dick has some very strong opinions in one direction. I'd be very interested to know what other people in the town thought, so we could get a stronger sense of how we can expand affordable housing units in a way that is supportive of what we think of ourselves of as a community. What does that look like? Maybe we need to do a little more work on that, and I think that's a topic that would be well worth involving more people in. And the other thing is we've had a really hard time talking about transportation and how do we get connected, and that's been challenging for me because I feel like there's never any hesitation when it turns it's about connecting, privileging vehicular transportation, but it's not the same thing with pedestrians and cycling. And I was reading recently, there's a book that was just published called Walkable City Rules by this guy called Jeff Speck. And he said that to be walkable, it has to be a couple of things. It has to be, useful, pleasant, safe, and interesting. And I think we fail a lot on all of those grounds. I mean, we just don't. We've got a lot to do in terms of making progress. So I don't know. I just see this as an opportunity to get some new people involved who can kind of bring some new ideas and new thoughts, and we can maybe have some more productive conversations and actually implement some of the great ideas that I think a lot of people thought we are starting to have.
And what's the proposal look like that we would
question.
submit?
And maybe the easiest way for me to answer that is to forward the Middlebury application to you. I sent it to Jason and a couple of other people who have been working with it, but I'll send it to everybody. It really starts with the identification of the people who would agree to be participants in the steering committee, and it requires that you have representations of certain types at a core. So these applications don't have to come from a town, and in Middlebury's case, it didn't come from the town. Steve Meyer, who was a rep, put it together, but there has to be a town rep, and there have to be other categories. There have to be a business rep, and you can fill them out. And so they had someone from the college, and they had, anyway, you'll see it. The proposal will be, somewhat similar to what Middlebury is proposing, but with different specifics. Like this says, there is a screening process, there's an interview, and then they get it down to 2. They do 2 a year.
I think it sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, it struck me as a great way to just get people involved, engaged, and hopefully make progress towards the things that we were talking about in the plan.
And so far, people who've been kind of zeroing in on this include people with SBPA, someone at Wake Robin. So there are a lot of community institutions that we could pull in, should be pulled in.
Okay.
Sounds like a thumbs up. And then I wasn't sure of the Town of Williston material that you had in here. Was that the
was just
carryover?
Informational because of this question about someday discussing Williston's growth management. And if I didn't include a paragraph in the cover memo, I apologize, but it's examples of how their growth management system is organized and carried out.
Yeah.
So Dean, when do we hear about that grant for the rural PUDs?
We did hear about it, and I thought I had forwarded that out, the announcement to
I
folks.
did. Yeah.
Oh, do we get it?
We did not get it.
Oh, darn.
Yeah, kind of a disappointment, given that they have funded that project 3 years ago in South Burlington. So it was a concept that they've agreed to, so
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I haven't had a chance to talk to Faith or anybody to get any inside information.
It just sounded like they had a large response, and so they had to just,
Yeah,
they
they
couldn't
almost
give it
said
to everybody. Well, yeah, sure.
But in a sense, that frees up, the money that is in the budget for pursuing something like that could conceivably go to something like this.
Is there a matching
No, well, the funding for this program is kind of weird. Their philosophy is that the energy will attract resources, and so you don't apply and get an award for, well, here's 10,000. You get technical assistance from their staff, and you get support for a period of time, like about 8 months after the meeting, but you don't get a check. By getting everybody together, the money kind of solves itself, which sounds simplistic, but that's the basic idea. But it means things like, well, the money that's proposed in the budget as a grant match for the municipal planning grant program could go for the meal. I mean, there's some kind of weird requirements, but you have to you have to have a meal or something in connection with this large meeting. Well, if we were planning on having $3,000 as a match for something, well, maybe you use that as the primary source for the big meal for the 150 people or 200 or however many you'll have.
So it sounds like a thumbs up to pursue. Great. All right.
I will send things out.
Is there anything else under other business from anybody? I would be happy to take a motion to adjourn.
So moved?
Moved by Kate. Second?
Second.
Seconded by Steven. All right, adjourn. All in favor?